Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're taking a really focused journey into one of the most pressing, complex, and honestly, deeply human challenges in modern education: student mental health. We're going to unpack exactly how trauma-informed teaching isn't just another educational buzzword, it's a fundamental shift in how we support the very real human beings sitting in our classrooms. We'll look at the realities of the mental health crisis, dismantle some old myths about how students process their needs, and ultimately discover the incredible, life-saving power of connection. So let's get started. Right out of the gate, we've got to address the elephant in the room. Are we expecting teachers to be therapists? I mean, it's a totally fair question. Educators today are facing an overwhelming reality. You're tasked with lesson planning, grading, and testing, but increasingly, you're also becoming the de facto mental health providers for a nation's youth. The boundaries of the job have expanded, and yeah, that can feel incredibly daunting. But as we'll see, the goal here isn't to give you a psychology degree, it's to equip you with trauma-informed tools that make your primary job, teaching, actually possible. Now, what's really eye-opening here is how clearly this data illustrates the scope of the crisis. According to the CDC, an estimated 1 in 5 kids in the US experience mental, emotional, or behavioral disorders every single year. That's a huge portion of your classroom. But there is a massive 80% gap when it comes to treatment. 80% of students with these disorders are walking the school halls, sitting in desks, and trying to learn without any specialized professional help whatsoever. And if that isn't sobering enough, think about this number: 6. It's startling, I know, but 6 is currently the median age of onset for anxiety disorders in children. Mood disorders typically begin just a little bit later, around age 13. I really want you to let that sink in. These battles don't begin in adulthood. They begin in first grade. They begin in middle school. These students are trying to navigate the foundational years of their academic and social lives while carrying this incredibly heavy, invisible burden. And this brilliantly illustrates what that burden actually looks like on the ground. An anonymous teacher shared this thought: "It's not that my kids aren't capable of learning math, it is just all of the other stuff that gets in the way." They go on to admit that they haven't found a way to effectively lesson plan their way around the growing numbers of students who share how completely overwhelmed they feel. This perfectly grounds all that heavy CDC data in the very human reality of a messy classroom. You just can't teach around a student's mental health crisis. You have to teach through it. Section 1. The Mechanics of Need. Rethinking Maslow's Hierarchy. So to really wrap our heads around supporting these students, we need a little context. The vital thing to remember is that a mental health challenge, even a diagnosed mental illness, doesn't fundamentally change a student's basic human nature. It just becomes part of their story. To understand that story, we have to look at how their basic needs are or aren't being met. You're probably familiar with Abraham Maslow's work. We have deficiency needs. These are physiological basics like food and shelter, feeling safe, having social connections, and building esteem. Then we have growth needs, like self-actualization. The key word here is deficiency, which suggests deprivation. When a student experiences prolonged deprivation of these basic needs, like chronically lacking nutritious food or feeling deeply isolated, it becomes a major risk factor. That deprivation directly amplifies their mental health challenges because they become understandably preoccupied with just trying to satisfy that missing need. Now, historically, our schools have actually stepped up to address these deficiency needs through loosely trauma-informed protective programs. We're talking about breakfast and lunch programs, physical health, hearing and vision screenings, and mandated reporting to keep kids safe. In a lot of ways, these practices help address those basic physical and safety needs. But here is the catch. Because of massive societal inequities, especially regarding access to mental health care, these broad-based programs just aren't enough on their own. They're a great foundation, sure, but they definitely aren't the whole house. Section 2. The Myth of the Ladder. Life is dynamic. You know, we often think of Maslow's hierarchy kind of like a rigid video game, like you have to perfectly beat level 1 before you can unlock level 2. But when we're talking about human beings, especially developing kids, we need to completely dismantle that myth. The reality is far more complex. Movement is dynamic and fluid, not static. Satisfying needs is absolutely not an all-or-nothing proposition. Students can and do experience needs across the entire hierarchy simultaneously. For example, a middle schooler might be hungry or even feel unsafe at home, yet they can still successfully build meaningful self-esteem and really deep social connections with their peers at school. Life is complicated, and it's messy. So the absolutely crucial point here is this: progress doesn't require perfection. When you help a student satisfy even just a single deficiency need, like helping them gain a genuine sense of belonging in your classroom, they immediately begin to accrue positive momentum. As they practice social problem solving with their peers, they build up their skills. They become increasingly resilient on their journey towards self-actualization. You don't have to fix their entire life outside of school to make a profound, measurable impact on their growth inside the school. Section 3, the power of connection. Becoming a protective factor. All right, this is where we shift gears from just understanding the context to actually becoming the catalyst for change. This is where you, the educators, step into your most powerful role. Let's clearly define what a protective factor is. These are the relationships and connections that serve as a bedrock to build resilience and mitigate the impacts of trauma or adverse childhood experiences. Notice what isn't in that definition. It doesn't say providing cognitive behavioral therapy. Being a protective factor isn't about diagnosing kids or treating clinical disorders. It's simply about providing stable, healthy, and caring human connection. And the stakes for providing that connection, they literally could not be higher. I want to draw your attention back to a pretty grim reality reported by the CDC. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for individuals between 15 and 24 years of age. Research shows that survivors of suicide attempts often state they didn't necessarily want to die. They simply wanted their immense pain to end, and they saw absolutely no hope for the future. In a very real way, operating a trauma-informed classroom acts as the very first layer of youth suicide prevention. But here is the incredible counter-statistic from the National Council for Mental Well-Being. Listen to this. Having at least one caring, healthy relationship with a trusted adult may be the single most important protective factor to minimize the risk of youth suicide. Elevating your role to become that trusted adult literally saves lives. It restores that missing hope for the future. You might genuinely be the only caring adult that a student interacts with all day. So how do we practically apply all this? Well, by focusing on universal or Tier 1 trauma-informed approaches. This means systematically embedding connection right into the daily flow of your classroom. It means treating the establishment of rapport as a massive priority that's just as essential as your lesson planning. By doing this, you create a conducive learning environment for everyone, and you're actively lowering the risk of suicidal thoughts. Now, obviously, for severe or complex mental health challenges, what we call Tier 3 needs, you'll absolutely need a team approach, collaborating with mental health professionals. But that universal foundation, it always starts with you in the classroom. Which leaves us with this final thought. You probably can't fix every systemic inequity out there, and you definitely can't magically cure every deficiency your students bring with them through the school doors. But you hold immense power. So the question is, how will you build connection in your classroom tomorrow? How are you going to show up as that bedrock protective factor? Keep that question front and center, because as we've learned in this explainer, your connection isn't just an educational tool, it's a lifeline. Thanks for joining me, and keep making a real difference out there.